The year was 1854, when the untamed Dakota Territory beckoned settlers with promises of new beginnings and harbored dangers they could scarcely imagine. In these vast lands where the Black Hills kissed the sky and winter winds whispered ancient secrets through pine forests, destiny had a way of turning misfortune into miracles. This is the remarkable account of Sarah Walsh, a woman whose eyes saw only darkness, but whose spirit would illuminate the path ahead. And Running Bear, a Lakota warrior who discovered that true sight comes not from the eyes, but from understanding. Hearts that dare to see beyond differences. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp October wind carried the scent of approaching winter as the wagon train creaked its way through Thunder Mountain Pass. Sarah Walsh sat near the back of the Hawthorne wagon, her unseeing eyes closed against the late afternoon sun, fingers absently tracing the raised patterns on her father's old compass case. The brass instrument, now useless to her blind touch, remained her most treasured possession, a reminder of the cartographer father who had taught her to map the world before fever stole her sight 2 winters past. The 31 wagons of the westbound caravan had been traveling for weeks, each mile taking them deeper into territory that made even the bravest men whisper prayers under their breath. Sarah heard everything in the subtle shifts of conversation around her, the nervous laughter that didn't quite mask fear, the way voices dropped when discussing the native peoples whose land they crossed, the increasingly strained patience in Joseph Hawthorne's responses to his wife Martha's endless complaints. Sarah understood her position all too well. After her parents' deaths from cholera the previous spring, the Hawthornes had taken her in, not from kindness, but for the deed to her family's modest property in Richmond. That land had been swiftly sold to fund their journey west. And now, Sarah existed as little more than an unwanted obligation, a burden made heavier by her blindness. The wagon wheel struck a deep rut, sending Sarah sliding across the rough planks. Her hands instinctively reached out, finding nothing but empty air before her shoulder collided painfully with a supply barrel. No one moved to help her regain her balance. It had been like this for days now, a growing coldness that spoke louder than words. She was becoming invisible even before she would become abandoned. Martha's sharp voice cut through the dusty air like a blade finding its mark between ribs. "Joseph, we're nearly out of water again. Certain people seem to forget that supplies must last until Pine Ridge settlement." The accusation hung heavy in the confined space, though Sarah had taken only her carefully measured morning ration, same as everyone else. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying something different, a metallic tang that made the horses stamp nervously in their traces. Sarah lifted her face, nostrils flaring as she tried to identify this new element in the air. Years of sightlessness had sharpened her other senses to an almost preternatural degree, and what she detected now sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "Storm coming," called Ezekiel Cooper, the wagon master, his gruff voice carrying back along the line. "Big one by the look of them clouds. We'll need to find shelter before it hits." Sarah could hear the urgency in his tone, feel the sudden tension that rippled through the caravan like a stone dropped in still water. The animals sensed it too, oxen lowing uneasily, horses tossing their heads against steadying hands. The whole train picked up pace, wheels groaning with the increased speed over rough terrain. Within the hour, the first snowflakes began to fall. Not the gentle, romantic snow of Virginia winters, but hard-driven pellets that stung exposed skin and found every gap in clothing. The wind rose to a howl, transforming the mountain pass into a tunnel of white fury that disoriented even those who could see. "Keep together!" Cooper's shout barely carried over the storm's roar. "Follow the wagon ahead! Don't lose sight of..." A deafening crack split the air as lightning struck somewhere terrifyingly close. In the chaos that followed, Sarah heard screams, the splinter of wood, the terrible sound of animals in panic. The Hawthorne wagon lurched violently, tilting at an impossible angle before righting itself with a bone-jarring thud. "The Murdoch wagon's gone over," someone screamed. "They're sliding down the ravine!" Pandemonium erupted. Orders shouted and countermanded, children crying, the crack of whips as drivers fought to control terrified teams. In the swirling confusion of snow and fear, Sarah found herself forgotten entirely. "Everyone to higher ground!" Cooper commanded. "Leave what you can't carry! Move! Move!" Sarah felt the wagon empty around her as the Hawthornes abandoned their position. She reached out, calling their names, but her voice was lost in the maelstrom. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized she was alone, blind and helpless in a blizzard that seemed determined to erase the world. With trembling hands, she gathered what she could: her father's compass, a small bundle of personal items, the heavy wool shawl that had been her mother's. She knew she had to move, had to try to follow the sounds of the retreating caravan. But which way? The wind came from all directions at once, sounds echoing deceptively off the canyon walls. Sarah climbed down from the wagon, her boots immediately sinking into already deep snow. She took a tentative step forward, then another, her hands outstretched. Like a sleepwalker, the ground beneath her feet felt unstable, treacherous. Was she moving towards safety or stepping off the edge of the world? A sudden gust knocked her off balance. She fell hard, the impact driving the breath from her lungs. Snow immediately began to cover her prone form, as if the mountain itself sought to bury her alive. With effort, she pushed herself up, only to realize she had lost all sense of direction. The sounds of the caravan had faded entirely, replaced by the relentless shriek of wind through rocky gaps. "Help!" she cried out, knowing it was futile. "Someone, please!" She stumbled forward, each step an act of faith over substance. Her feet found no wagon ruts to follow, no footprints to trace. Time lost meaning in the white blindness that matched her own darkness. Was she moving in circles? Had minutes passed or hours? Eventually, exhaustion and cold forced her to seek what shelter she could find. Her searching hands discovered a rocky outcropping, a slight overhang that offered minimal protection from the driving snow. She huddled there, pulling her mother's shawl tight around shoulders that wouldn't stop shaking. As the storm raged on, Sarah's thoughts turned inward. This, then, was how her story would end, not with the dignity of age or the peace of illness, but abandoned in a blizzard by people who saw her only as an inconvenience. She thought of her father, mapping territories he would never see, creating guides for journeys he would never take. Had he ever imagined his daughter would die unmarked and unmourned in the very wilderness he had charted? The cold seeped deeper, a lethargy that whispered seductive promises of warmth if only she would close her eyes and sleep. Sarah fought against it, some stubborn spark refusing to surrender even as her body began to shut down. She pressed herself harder against the rock face, trying to become one with the stone, to draw from it some ancient strength. Night fell. Not that it mattered to her perpetual darkness, but she could feel the temperature plummet further, hear the subtle change in the storm's voice as it settled in for a long assault. Her fingers and toes had long since gone numb. Each breath came as a labored rasp, the cold air burning her lungs. In her growing delirium, Sarah began to hum softly to herself. Old lullabies her mother had sung, hymns from childhood church services, fragments of songs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than memory. The music was barely audible above the wind, but it gave her something to focus on besides the cold that was slowly claiming her. It was then, in that borderland between consciousness and surrender, that she heard it. Footsteps. Not the chaotic stumbling of someone lost in the storm, but measured, deliberate movement. the sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going, despite the blinding snow. Sarah's voice had frozen in her throat. She couldn't call out, couldn't move, could only wait as those mysterious footsteps drew closer, closer still, until they stopped directly in front of her huddled form. A presence loomed above her, and for a wild moment, Sarah wondered if death had come to claim her in some physical form. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then a voice spoke, deep and measured, cutting through the storm's howl with surprising clarity. "You sing to the wind, Washichu woman. Even in dying, you offer music to the storm." The words were English, but carried an accent Sarah had never heard before. Not the lilting tones of Irish immigrants or the clipped consonants of German settlers, but something older, more integral to this land itself. "I hear your spirit song," the voice continued. "It calls to those who know how to listen. Are you ready to walk the star path, or do you still cling to this world?" Sarah tried to speak, managed only a wheeze that might have been help or might have been merely the last exhale of hope. Strong hands, surprisingly gentle despite their obvious power, lifted her from the snow. She felt herself cradled against a chest covered in what felt like fur or hide, smelled leather and smoke and pine needles, scents that spoke of shelter and survival rather than the sterile death of the blizzard. "The Great Spirit has plans yet for you, singing one," the stranger murmured, as he began to move through the storm with that same impossible confidence. "Though your eyes are dark, perhaps you will help others see." Sarah's consciousness flickered, like a candle in the wind, as darkness finally claimed her, a different darkness than the one she had lived with for 2 years, deeper and more absolute. Her last coherent thought was wonder at the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. Abandoned by her own people, she was being saved by one of the very savages the settlers so feared. The warrior moved through the blizzard as if the very wind parted before him, carrying his unexpected burden toward shelter, toward survival, toward a destiny neither of them could yet imagine. Behind them, the storm erased all traces of their passage, as if the mountain itself conspired to hide this moment when two worlds collided and, against all probability, chose compassion over conquest. Sarah's first conscious sensation was warmth. Real warmth, not the deceptive final embrace of hypothermia, but the steady radiance of a well-tended fire. She lay on something soft, covered in layers that smelled of sage and cedar. Sounds filtered through her returning awareness, the crackle of burning wood, the muffled howl of wind beyond thick walls, and somewhere nearby, the rhythmic whisper of someone working with practiced hands. She tried to speak, but her throat felt raw, scraped bare by cold air and desperate calling. The attempt produced only a hoarse croak that nonetheless brought immediate response. Footsteps approached, and that same deep voice from the storm spoke again. "You return to the world of the living, singing one. The spirits have decided you still have songs to share." A vessel touched her lips, carved wood, smooth with use, and cool water trickled into her mouth. Sarah drank carefully, each swallow bringing her more fully back to herself. When she could finally speak, her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Where am I?" "Safe," came the simple reply, "in the shelter of Beartooth Cave, beyond reach of storm and those who abandoned you." The reminder of her abandonment struck like a physical blow. Sarah turned her face away, though in her darkness the gesture meant little. Tears she thought frozen forever began to flow, silent testimony to betrayal and fear and the overwhelming relief of survival. "I am called Running Bear," the voice continued, allowing her this moment of grief. "In the language of my people, Mato Ingyanke, The storm brought you to me, or perhaps brought me to you. Such matters are for wiser ones to interpret. Sarah, she managed. Sarah Walsh, I don't understand. Why did you help me? Your people and mine. She trailed off, uncertain how to address the vast chasm of mistrust and violence that separated their worlds. My people say the storm tests all equally, Running Bear replied. It does not see the color of skin or the language of prayers. In the face of death, we are all relations. To leave you would dishonor the teachings of my grandfather and the ways of the Lakota. Sarah absorbed this, marveling at the simple wisdom that cut through years of prejudice and fear-mongering she'd heard in settler communities. The fire popped loudly, sending up a shower of sparks she couldn't see but could hear distinctly. How long was I unconscious? The sun has risen and set once since I found you. The storm still rages, but its fury weakens. Soon it will pass, leaving the world clean and dangerous in equal measure. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her throat, seeking the familiar comfort of her mother's locket. Finding it gone, panic flared until Running Bear's voice came again, calm and reassuring. Your belongings rest beside you. All was preserved, including the brass circle that points the way for seeing eyes and the writings with raised symbols. Relief flooded through her. My father's compass and mother's prayer book, they're all I have left of them. Objects carry the spirits of those who treasured them, Running Bear observed. But you mistake Singing One. They are not all you have left. Their teachings live in your breath, their love in your heartbeat. The blind often see this truth more clearly than those whose eyes deceive them with surfaces. The philosophical depth of his words surprised Sarah. Everything she'd been told about the native peoples had painted them as simple, savage, dangerous. Yet here sat a man who spoke with the wisdom of poets and the compassion of saints. Your English is remarkable, she said, then immediately worried she'd given offense. A sound that might have been quiet laughter answered her. Black robes. What? You call missionaries. Came to our village when I was young. They taught words but failed to understand that we already had our own. I learned their tongue to know their hearts, for good and ill. Knowledge is a weapon or a bridge, depending on how one wields it. Over the next hours, as the storm gradually spent its fury, Sarah learned fragments of her rescuer's story. Running Bear was what his people called a scout and warrior, one who moved between the world of the Lakota and the ever-encroaching realm of white settlers. He had been tracking the wagon train from a distance, not with hostile intent, but to gauge its size and direction, to report back to his village about these latest intruders into sacred lands. Why were you alone? Sarah asked. Don't scouts usually travel in groups? Sometimes the spirit calls us to solitary paths, he replied cryptically. I had matters to consider, decisions that weigh heavy on a man's soul. Before Sarah could inquire further, Running Bear rose and moved about the cave. She heard him adding wood to the fire, then the distinctive sound of something being poured. Tea from willow bark and bearberry, he explained, pressing another cup into her hands. It will restore your strength and ease the pain of cold sickness. The brew was bitter but not unpleasant, carrying an earthy warmth that seemed to spread from her center outward. As she drank, Running Bear settled back into position, close, enough that she could sense his presence, but maintaining a respectful distance that spoke of ingrained propriety. Tell me of your darkness, he said after a while. Was it always your companion, or did it come as an unwelcome visitor? Sarah found herself recounting the fever that had swept through Richmond 2 years past, taking her parents and leaving her sightless. She spoke of learning to navigate a world of sounds and textures, of the pity that felt heavier than her actual blindness, of how quickly she'd gone from beloved daughter to unwanted burden. In my village, those who lose one sense often gain deeper understanding in others, Running Bear reflected. They become keepers of memory, speakers of truth, bridges between the seen and unseen worlds. But your people, they value only what eyes can measure. Not all of them, Sarah protested weakly, though she knew the truth of his words. My father tried to teach me that maps exist in more than lines on paper. He said the best cartographers carried the landscape in their hearts. A wise man. What became of these teachings? He died before he could finish them, and after. Now, well, the Hawthornes had no interest in the ramblings of a blind woman about invisible maps. Running Bear made a sound of disapproval. The Hawthorne pair. I watched them abandon you. The man looked back once, the woman not at all. Their hearts are small, frozen by fear and greed. They weren't always cruel, Sarah felt compelled to say, though she wondered why she defended them. Just practical. They saw me as a burden they couldn't afford in this new land. Practical. Running Bear tested the word as if it tasted bitter. This is the excuse your people use for many cruelties. The Lakota have another word, wowachangitonake, compassion. It means seeing with the heart, acting with mercy even when it brings hardship. Without it, humans become less than the animals they claim to master. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence, broken only by the dying wind outside and the steady crackle of the fire. Sarah found herself marveling at how quickly she'd adapted to this strange situation. By all rights, she should be terrified, alone with a Lakota warrior in some hidden cave, completely at his mercy. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. Tomorrow, if the storm breaks, I will teach you the first lessons of survival, Running Bear announced. Your people may have abandoned you, but the Earth Mother never turns away her children. You will learn to hear her voice, to feel her guidance. But I can't see. The hawk does not need to see the wind to ride its currents. The salmon does not need to see the stream to find its birthplace. You have been seeing with borrowed eyes for too long, Sarah Walsh. It is time to discover your own vision. That night, as Sarah drifted towards sleep on her bed of furs, she replayed their conversations in her mind. Running Bear's perspective challenged everything she thought she knew about strength, value, and survival. In her world, her blindness marked her as defective, incomplete. In his understanding, it might be a doorway to different kinds of perception. She woke before dawn, a habit from sighted days that her body maintained even in perpetual darkness. The fire had burned low, but still provided warmth. She could hear Running Bear's steady breathing nearby, not the deep rhythm of sleep, but the measured cadence of someone long accustomed to resting while remaining alert. You wake early, he observed, apparently noting some change in her own breathing. This is good. The morning teaches lessons the afternoon forgets. I used to watch the sunrise with my father, Sarah said softly. He said dawn was when the world renewed its promises. Your father saw truly. Each day births itself anew, offering fresh chances to walk in beauty. Come, we begin your education. What followed was unlike any teaching Sarah had experienced. Running Bear first guided her hands over the cave's contours, helping her build a mental image of their shelter. He showed her how to maintain the fire by sound and heat alone, how to arrange supplies in consistent patterns for easy location, how to move through space with confidence rather than fear. Your stick, he said, referring to the stout branch she'd carried from Virginia. It is your forward eye, but you use it like a shield, pushing the world away. Let it become an extension of your awareness, a gentle conversation with the earth. He demonstrated the technique, though she couldn't see the movement. Instead, he guided her hands to feel how he swept the stick in smooth arcs, reading the terrain through vibrations and resistance. It was a far cry from the tentative tapping she'd been using. The earth speaks constantly, he explained as they practiced. Each surface has its own voice. Frozen ground rings different from mud, stone from wood. Your feet too must learn to listen. By midday, Sarah had graduated to navigating the area immediately around the cave entrance. The storm had indeed broken, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. The air bit with crystalline clarity, carrying sounds with supernatural sharpness. She could hear snow sliding from pine boughs, the distant crack of ice-burdened branches, the whisper of wind through naked aspens. "Tell me what you sense," Running Bear instructed, standing beside her in the cave mouth. Sarah concentrated, pushing past the obvious to reach for subtler information. The wind comes from the northwest, carrying the scent of more snow. The land slopes downward to my right. I can hear how sound travels differently in that direction. There's water somewhere below us, not flowing but not completely frozen. And she paused, tilting her head. Something moves in the trees, to our left. Not large. Rabbit, perhaps? Good. You begin to see. The rabbit seeks tender bark, made accessible by heavy snow. It knows the risk, but hunger drives it from safety. This is the balance all creatures must find. Need against danger, courage measured against wisdom. And as afternoon wore on, Running Bear expanded her lessons to include practical skills. He taught her to identify different woods by texture and scent, to build and tend a fire by touch, to prepare simple foods without sight. Each task came with stories and teachings that revealed the depth of Lakota knowledge. "My grandmother lost her sight in her final years," he shared as they worked. "The people honored her more, not less. They said the spirits had chosen her to see beyond the veil, to speak truths that eyes might miss. She became our most trusted advisor in matters of the heart." "How different from my world," Sarah mused, carefully stirring a pot of pine needle tea by the sound of liquid movement. "Blindness closes doors rather than opening them. Then perhaps you were guided here to learn new ways of being. The great mystery works in patterns we cannot always perceive. What seems like ending may be beginning in disguise." That evening, as they shared a simple meal of dried meat and root vegetables, Sarah felt a shift within herself. The terror and despair of abandonment hadn't vanished, but alongside them grew something new, possibility. Running Bear treated her not as a helpless invalid, but as a student capable of growth, adaptation, mastery. "Tomorrow, if you feel strong enough, we will venture further," he announced. "There are plants to gather before deep winter. Techniques to learn while snow still permits teaching, but first you must decide. Decide what? Whether you wish to survive merely to return to those who discarded you, or whether you seek something more. The path splits here, Sarah Walsh. One direction leads back to the world you knew, where your worth is measured by what you cannot do. The other leads into unknown territory, where perhaps a blind woman might find vision your people cannot imagine. The question hung between them, profound in its implications. Sarah understood she was being offered more than survival skills. This was a choice about identity, about the very nature of her existence in a world that had no place for her as she was. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Time is what the mountain gives freely," Running Bear replied. "But know that some decisions once made reshape the soul itself. Choose with your whole heart, not from fear or anger or the false comfort of familiar chains." That night, Sarah lay awake long hours, wrestling with possibilities she'd never dared consider. The cave had become a threshold between worlds, not just between settler and Lakota, but between who she had been and who she might become. In the darkness that was her constant companion, new kinds of light began to flicker, tentative as spring shoots through snow, but determinedly pushing toward an unseen sun. The days that followed brought revelations as steady as falling snow. Sarah discovered that learning to navigate darkness wasn't simply about replacing sight with other senses. It was about understanding the world in an entirely different way. Running Bear proved to be a patient but exacting teacher, his methods rooted in generations of Lakota wisdom. Their third morning together, he introduced her to what he called earth reading. They ventured a short distance from the cave, Sarah's, hand resting lightly on Running Bear's arm for guidance until they reached a small clearing. "Here we stop," he announced. "Now, tell me about this place." Sarah stood still, letting information flow through her remaining senses. The wind touched her face from multiple directions, suggesting an open space surrounded by trees. The ground beneath her feet felt different, harder, more compacted than the forest floor. "We're in a clearing," she began tentatively. "The trees form a rough circle around us. This place has been used before. The earth is packed down from many footsteps. There's something else, a pattern to how the space feels. Ceremonial." "Your spirit sees truly," Running Bear confirmed with approval. "This is a sacred circle used by my people for generations. The very air remembers prayers spoken here, offerings made, wisdom shared. Places hold memory just as people do." He guided her to the center of the circle, then stepped back. "Now, find your way to the edge and back without my help. Trust what you've learned." Fear fluttered in Sarah's chest, but she pushed it down. Using her walking stick as Running Bear had taught her, she began to move. The stick whispered across the ground, sending back information about texture, slope, obstacles. She counted steps, felt the subtle changes in air movement, listened to how sound behaved differently near the tree line. When she successfully returned to the center, Running Bear's quiet good carried more weight than any effusive praise she'd received in her former life. "Your people rely too much on eyes alone," he observed. "They miss the stories told by wind and stone, the wisdom carried. In silence, you are learning to read the world's true language." As the days passed, Sarah's education expanded beyond mere survival skills. Running Bear shared Lakota understanding of the natural world, how to predict weather changes by the behavior of birds, which plants offered medicine or food, how to move through the forest without disturbing its harmony. "Everything connects," he explained one afternoon as they gathered late-season herbs. "The mouse feeds the hawk. The hawk's hunting controls the mouse numbers. The controlled mice preserve. Seeds that grow into plants that feed more mice. Break one strand and the whole web trembles." Sarah carefully felt the leaves of the plant he'd placed in her hands, memorizing their distinctive shape and texture. "In my world, we saw nature as something to conquer, to bend to our will." "And where has this conquering led?" Running Bear asked quietly. "Your people cross lands that are not theirs, take what is not given, wonder why the earth grows angry. The Lakota know we are part of the web, not its masters." His words resonated with something deep in Sarah's heart. She thought of her father's maps, how they reduced vast landscapes to lines and notations, claiming ownership over places they'd never truly known. "My father tried to understand," she said. "He believed maps should show more than boundaries. They should capture the spirit of a place." Other cartographers laughed at his notes about the way morning light transforms the valley or where eagles choose to nest. "Your father had the heart of a truth seeker. Perhaps this gift passed to you, waiting for blindness to awaken it." That evening, as they prepared the day's harvest, Running Bear grew thoughtful. "Soon we must speak of what comes next. The snow deepens daily. Travel becomes more difficult, then impossible. Decisions cannot wait for spring's convenience." Sarah's hands stilled on the herbs she was sorting. In the focused intensity of learning, she'd managed to push aside thoughts of the future. Now reality reasserted itself with uncomfortable clarity. "The Hawthorns won't search for me," she said with certainty. "By now they've reached Pine Ridge Settlement, told whatever story suits them best. Probably claimed I fell into a ravine or was taken by wolves. And if you appeared there alive, what then?" She considered this. "They'd be shocked, perhaps ashamed. But ultimately, they'd see me as the same burden, only now with wild ideas, gained from savages. There's nothing for me there. There is another path, Running Bear said carefully. My village lies 2 days' journey north, in the sheltered valley we call Whispering Creek. Winter camp has been established there. Sarah's breath caught. Your village? But surely they wouldn't welcome a white woman, especially one who can't contribute. You still think as your people taught you, he interrupted gently. Among the Lakota, each person's worth isn't measured by what they produce, but by who. They are in relation to all. We have those who cannot see, cannot walk, cannot hear. They are not burdens, but teachers, showing us different ways of being. The possibility simultaneously thrilled and terrified her. To live among the Lakota, to fully embrace this new way of understanding the world, it was beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Yet doubt gnawed at her. What about you? She asked. Bringing me to your village could cause problems. I've heard enough to know that feelings about settlers run strong, and with reason. Running Bear was quiet for long moments. When he spoke, his voice carried undercurrents Sarah was learning to recognize, duty warring with desire, tradition grappling with change. There are those who will question my choice. Some will see only an enemy, others a burden we cannot afford in lean times. But I answer to my own conscience and to the guidance of spirits. They brought me to you in that storm for reasons beyond our knowing. Or perhaps it was chance, Sarah suggested, though she no longer truly believed it. The Lakota do not believe in chance as your people do. Every encounter carries purpose. Every path crossing has meaning. Whether we understand and that meaning. He made a gesture Sarah felt rather than saw, a lifting of shoulders that suggested acceptance of mystery. That night, Sarah found sleep elusive. Her mind wrestled with possibilities, each more daunting than the last. Return to the settlements meant returning to a half-life of dependence and pity, but choosing the Lakota path meant abandoning everything. Familiar, trusting her fate to people her own kind, had wronged repeatedly. Sometime in the deep hours before dawn, she rose and made her way carefully to the cave entrance. The night air bit with fierce cold, but she welcomed its clarity. Standing there, facing what she imagined must be a star-filled sky, Sarah made her choice. I want to learn more, she announced when Running Bear stirred at first light. Not just survival skills, but your language, your ways. If your village will have me, I choose that path. Running Bear received this declaration with characteristic calm, though Sarah sensed deeper currents beneath. Then we prepare for the journey. 2 days' travel in snow requires planning, especially for one still learning winter's ways. What followed was intensive preparation. Running Bear crafted snowshoes sized for Sarah's feet, teaching her the distinctive gait required to use them effectively. He showed her how to layer clothing for maximum warmth, how to recognize dangerous ice by sound alone, how to find direction when storms obscured all landmarks. The journey will test you, he warned, not just your body, but your spirit. You must be certain. I'm certain of uncertainty, Sarah replied with a wry smile. But that feels more honest than the false securities. I've known. Joe, on their final night in the cave, Running Bear performed a simple ceremony, offering tobacco to the 4 directions and speaking prayers in Lakota. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she felt their power, the weight of tradition stretching back countless generations. I asked the spirits to guide our path, he explained afterward, to protect you as you walk between worlds, to give my people wisdom in receiving you. Change comes whether we wish it or not. The question is whether we meet it with open hands or clenched fists. They set out at dawn, the cave that had been Sarah's sanctuary disappearing behind them as they entered a landscape transformed by winter. The snowshoes felt awkward at first, but she soon found their rhythm, following the soft swish-swish of Running Bear's steps ahead of her. He maintained a steady stream of instruction as they traveled, teaching her to recognize subtle changes in snow conditions, to gauge the depth of drifts by sound, to sense when weather was shifting. Sarah absorbed it all with the desperate attention of someone whose life might depend on such knowledge. By midday, muscles she didn't know she possessed screamed in protest. The snowshoes, initially liberating, now felt like leaden weights. Yet she pressed on, driven by determination not to prove the burden everyone expected her to be. "We rest here," Running Bear announced, guiding her to a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock formation. "You push yourself hard, but wisdom knows when to yield." As they shared dried meat and melted snow for water, Sarah voiced a question that had been building all morning. "Tell me about your village. What should I expect?" Whispering Creek shelters perhaps 200 souls in winter camp. Families share lodges. Children run free between them. Elders hold council by the central fire. Life follows rhythms old as the mountains themselves. "And your family?" A pause, weighted with things unsaid. "My parents walk the spirit path now. I have a sister, Singing Crow, who tends the sick and interprets dreams. No wife, no children of my own. The warrior's path often demands solitude." Sarah heard the loneliness beneath his words, recognized it as kin to her own isolation. "Why did you choose that path?" "Sometimes paths choose us. I showed skill in tracking, in moving unseen, in reading signs others missed. The elders saw in me one who could walk between Lakota and white worlds, gathering knowledge to protect our people. It is honored work, but—" He trailed off. "But lonely," Sarah finished for him. "Yes." The simple admission hung between them, creating a bridge of shared understanding. They resumed their journey as afternoon shadows lengthened. The terrain grew more challenging, requiring careful navigation through narrow passes and across frozen streams. Sarah's earlier confidence wavered as exhaustion set in, but Running Bear's steady presence kept her moving forward. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in what Running Bear described as brilliant crimsons and golds, they crested a rise. Running Bear stopped, his sudden intake of breath alerting Sarah to something significant. "What is it?" she asked. "Below us lies the valley of Whispering Creek. Home." His voice carried a complex mixture of emotions: relief, pride, apprehension. "We will reach it before full dark." Sarah felt her heart rate quicken. Soon she would face the reality of her choice, enter a world where she would be the strangest of strangers, dependent on the goodwill of people who had every reason to mistrust her kind. "Are you ready?" Running Bear asked, as if sensing her anxiety. "No," she answered honestly, "but I don't think I ever will be. Sometimes we must step forward despite our fears." "Spoken like a true warrior," he said, with what sounded like pride. "Come, let us complete this journey." As they began their descent into the valley, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that terrible storm. The woman who had huddled helplessly in the snow, waiting for death, seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood someone still. Blind, yes, but no longer sightless. Someone who had learned to navigate by different stars, to find her way by heart rather than eye. The village dogs announced their approach first, their barks carrying clearly through the cold air. Soon, other sounds reached them. Voices calling questions, children's excited chatter, the daily sounds of community life. Sarah's grip tightened on her walking stick, but she kept her chin high, her steps steady. Whatever awaited in Whispering Creek, she would meet it as herself. Not as the helpless blind woman others had defined, but as someone who had survived. Abandonment, learned from the earth itself, and chosen her own path forward. Running Bear had shown her that darkness could be navigated, that different kinds of vision existed. Now came the true test, whether she could help others see what he had taught her to understand. As they reached the valley floor and the sounds of the village grew closer, Sarah felt a peculiar sensation, as if she stood at the threshold of a door she couldn't see, but knew was there. Behind lay everything familiar, safe, known. Ahead stretched mystery, challenge, possibility. With a deep breath that tasted of pine and snow and hope, she stepped through. I need to create a new part for this story about a blind settler woman named Sarah Walsh, who has been rescued by Running Bear, a Lakota warrior. She's been learning survival skills from him and is now being brought to his village. This part needs to cover her reception in the village, challenges she faces, and her growing connection with the Lakota community, particularly focusing on her unique abilities despite her blindness. The story explores themes of cultural exchange, finding strength in perceived weakness, and choosing one's own path. The village emerged from the winter twilight like a dream emerging from mist, though Sarah couldn't see the scattered lodges that Running Bear described. Her other senses painted the scene with remarkable clarity. The smoke from multiple cooking fires carried the rich scents of unfamiliar herbs and roasting meat. Children's voices, momentarily excited by the arrival of strangers, were quickly hushed by cautious adults. Dogs barked challenges that were silenced by sharp commands. The crunch of many feet on snow approached, then halted at a respectful distance. "We have arrived," Running Bear said quietly, his hand resting briefly on Sarah's elbow, more reassurance than guidance. Chief Standing Elk approaches with the council elders. Sarah straightened her posture, clutching her walking stick with white-knuckled determination. The past weeks with Running Bear had taught her to face challenges directly, to find dignity in self-reliance rather than shame in dependence. She would meet the Lakota leadership as an equal, not as a beggar seeking charity. Running Bear spoke in flowing Lakota, his voice carrying formal cadences that suggested ritual greeting. An older male voice responded, the tone measured and authoritative. The exchange continued for several minutes, occasionally punctuated by questions from other voices. Throughout it all, Sarah stood perfectly still, aware of being scrutinized by dozens of unseen eyes. "Chief Standing Elk welcomes us to Whispering Creek," Running Bear finally translated. "He says the winter spirits have sent unusual messengers this season." He paused, then added, "Many are curious about a blind white woman who travels with a Lakota warrior. Some are concerned." The chief spoke again, his words carrying less formality now, more direct questioning. Running Bear's responses came with increased tension that Sarah could hear in his carefully modulated tone. A younger male voice interrupted, sharp with what sounded unmistakably like accusation. "Swift Arrow questions my judgment," Running Bear explained in English. "He believes I endanger the village by bringing a settler here, especially when soldiers increase their patrols after winter storms." Before Sarah could respond, another voice rose from the gathered crowd. Female, elderly, carrying unmistakable authority. The assembled villagers grew immediately silent as this new speaker continued at length. "White Feather speaks," Running Bear whispered, surprise evident in his voice. "She is our oldest grandmother, keeper of dreams and visions. She says she has been waiting for you." The pronouncement sparked an immediate reaction, murmurs of astonishment, questions in rapid Lakota too fast for Running Bear to translate. Sarah felt the quality of attention shift dramatically, not necessarily warmer, but infinitely more intense. When Whitefeather finished speaking, Chief Standing Elk addressed the gathering once more, his tone suggesting finality. Running Bear's shoulders relaxed slightly as he translated. "You are granted shelter for 7 days while the council considers your presence. White Feather has claimed the right to host you in her lodge. Thank you, Sarah said clearly, projecting her voice to reach beyond just Running Bear. She added carefully practiced words in Lakota. Filamayaye, your kindness honors me. Her pronunciation must have been acceptata, for a ripple of surprised murmurs ran through the crowd. The tension didn't evaporate, but it shifted subtly, curiosity now tempering suspicion. As the gathering began to disperse, Running Bear described their surroundings in hushed detail. The village forms a circular pattern around the central council fire. 7 large family lodges surround smaller dwellings. White Feather's lodge stands to the east, marked with her symbols as Dream Keeper and Medicine Woman. They approached what must have been the elderly woman's dwelling, for that remarkable voice greeted them once more. Gnarled fingers took Sarah's, hands examining them with careful attention that felt more like reading than mere touch. White Feather reads your spirit through your hands, Running Bear explained. She says the calluses tell her you work despite blindness. The scratches speak of determination. The way you hold yourself reveals both fear and courage. The old woman spoke again, her voice surprisingly strong, despite its age-roughened edges. Running Bear translated with clear surprise in his tone. She says she dreamed of your coming 3 moons ago, a woman who walks in darkness, bringing unexpected light. She welcomes you not as guest, but as one the spirits have sent with purpose. Inside White Feather's lodge, warmth enveloped Sarah like a living presence after the bitter cold of their journey. The air carried complex layers of scent, woody smoke, dried herbs, tanned leather, and something sweeter she couldn't identify. The space felt larger than she'd anticipated, with subtle sounds suggesting multiple living areas arranged around a central fire. White Feather guided her to a sitting place near the warmth, then moved with deliberate purpose, creating patterns of sound. Sarah instinctively began memorizing the distinctive shuffle of moccasins on packed earth, the clink of what might be pottery vessels, the whisper of dried plants being handled. Running Bear must return to the men's council, the old woman said in Lakota, which the warrior quickly translated. They require his explanation. The blind one stays with me. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety at losing her one connection to the familiar, but suppressed it firmly. This was what she had chosen, to walk a new path, to learn new ways of being. As Running Bear's footsteps faded outside, White Feather settled across the fire with a sound of creaking joints and dignified patience. Now, the elderly woman said, in heavily accented but unmistakable English, startling Sarah completely. We speak truth between us. Why does white woman choose Lakota path? The directness of the question, coming in unexpected English, momentarily left Sarah speechless. She gathered her thoughts, instinctively understanding that her answer would shape whatever came next. I didn't choose at first, she began honestly. My people left me to die in the blizzard. Running Bear saved me, taught me when he could have walked away. He showed me that blindness doesn't mean helplessness, that different ways of seeing exist. She paused, then added, in my world, my blindness made me worthless. Here, he suggested it might be valued differently. White Feather made a thoughtful sound, then switched back to Lakota, speaking at length while preparing what smelled like some kind of herbal tea. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the cadence suggested storytelling rather than interrogation. Occasionally, the old woman would pause to translate key points. My grandmother's grandmother lost sight after long illness. Some feared evil spirits had stolen her vision, but wiser ones knew better sight had been granted. She became our greatest dreamer, seeing paths through storms, finding medicines where others saw only weeds, warning of dangers before they arrived. She pressed a warm clay cup into Sarah's hands. The tea smelled of mint and something earthier that Sarah couldn't identify. As they drank in companionable silence, sounds filtered through the lodge walls, children playing despite the late hour, adults calling to one another, dogs barking at some disturbance. Normal village life flowing around the extraordinary circumstance of a blind white woman in their midst. "Tomorrow begins your true learning," Whitefeather announced. "Running Bear taught your body to survive. Now your spirit must learn as well." Many eyes will watch to see if Wasichu woman brings medicine or misfortune. The next morning began before dawn. Whitefeather roused Sarah from deep sleep with a gentle but insistent touch, guiding her outside into the biting cold where the village still slumbered. They settled on what felt like a fur-covered sitting platform near the lodge entrance. "Listen," Whitefeather instructed in her limited English. "Village wakes, has own song." Sarah obediently closed her eyes, a habit from sighted days that persisted despite its meaninglessness, and focused her attention outward. At first, she heard only the profound silence of a snow-covered landscape before sunrise. Then gradually, details emerged. The soft hoot of an owl finishing its night hunt, the distant crunch of ice breaking on the creek that gave the village its name, the first stirrings of life from the lodges nearest them. "Each sound tells story," Whitefeather explained. "Who rises first, which children wake hungry, which dogs bark at shadows. Medicine woman must hear village's heart." The implication that Sarah might someday serve such a function in this community both startled and intrigued her. As the village awakened fully around them, Whitefeather continued the lesson, helping Sarah identify specific families by their morning rhythms, teaching her to recognize individual voices and footsteps. "You hear much already," the old woman observed. "Running Bear taught well. But hearing without understanding is like having eyes that cannot see beyond surfaces." The remainder of that first day introduced Sarah to a whirlwind of new experiences. Whitefeather brought her to the women's work area, where initial silence greeted their arrival. Through the old woman's translated introductions, Sarah learned she was in the presence of the village's women, gathered for daily tasks of preparing hides, crafting implements, and preserving food stores. "I can work," Sarah offered, holding out her hands. "Running Bear taught me to clean small game, to prepare herbs, to weave simple baskets." Whitefeather translated, and after a moment of hesitation, someone placed a bundle of plant fibers in Sarah's hands, along with a half-completed basket. Sarah's fingers traced the pattern, memorizing the weave before continuing the work with careful precision. The quality of silence around her gradually shifted from suspicious observation to something closer to professional assessment. By midday, several women had approached with questions, asking through Whitefeather how a blind person accomplished specific tasks. Sarah demonstrated techniques Running Bear had taught her, using different textures to mark positions, creating consistent patterns that fingers could follow, relying on smell and sound for information others gathered visually. A young woman named Spotted Fawn showed particular interest, eventually revealing through translation that her grandmother was losing her sight but refusing to relinquish her basket making. Sarah's methods might allow the elder to continue her valued work. "You bring useful knowledge," Whitefeather commented that evening as they shared a meal in her lodge. "This opens minds that fear might otherwise close." Later that night, Running Bear visited briefly, bringing news of the council's deliberations. "Standing Elk believes your presence is the spirit's will, not to be questioned," he reported. "Others fear you bring the attention of soldiers, or worse, represent the first wave of more settlers. Swift Arrow speaks most strongly against you." "And you?" Sarah asked. "What position do you defend?" A moment of silence followed. "I spoke truth, that I found you abandoned, that the storm spirits guided me to you, that you have learned our ways with respect. The rest is for the council to decide." The following days established a rhythm. Mornings began with Whitefeather's listening exercises, teaching Sarah to interpret the village's daily patterns. Daytime brought integration into women's work, circles, where initial wariness gradually gave way to cautious acceptance as Sarah demonstrated both useful skills and genuine humility in learning Lakota ways. A breakthrough came on the fourth day when a young mother named Morningbird brought her fussing infant to Whitefeather's lodge. The baby had been crying incessantly, its tiny body rigid with apparent pain. The women tried various remedies without success, their voices growing increasingly concerned as they consulted with Whitefeather. Sarah, sitting quietly in the corner where she'd been sorting herbs by scent, caught a distinctive smell beneath the expected aromas of milk and swaddling cloths. "May I?" she asked, holding out her hands. Whitefeather translated, and after a moment's hesitation, the young mother placed her suffering child in Sarah's arms. Sarah carefully explored the infant's tiny body with gentle fingers, paying particular attention to the abdomen. The child's belly felt hard, distended, the pattern of tension suggesting trapped air rather than infection or hunger. "In Virginia, we called this wind colic," she explained as Whitefeather translated. "My mother taught me to help babies release the trapped air." With practiced movements, recalled from helping her sister with her children years before, Sarah positioned the infant face down across her forearm, supporting the head while applying gentle pressure to the back in a circular pattern. Within minutes, the baby released an impressive burst of gas, followed by almost immediate relaxation of its rigid body. The young mother's exclamations needed no translation. Within hours, word had spread through the village that the blind white woman possessed healing knowledge for suffering infants. By evening, 3 more mothers had brought their colicky babies to Whitefeather's lodge. "You gain allies," the old woman observed with satisfaction. "Even Swift Arrow must recognize useful medicine, whatever its source." On the 5th day, Whitefeather announced that Sarah would accompany her to gather specific winter plants that grew near the sacred hot springs a short distance from the village. Running Bear appeared to guide them, explaining that Chief Standing Elk had ordered him as escort, protection both for them and, implicitly, from Sarah herself, should this be some elaborate deception. The journey to the springs took most of the morning, following paths Sarah navigated with growing confidence using techniques Running Bear had taught her. The air grew increasingly warm and mineral-scented as they approached their destination, culminating in an area where steam rose visibly from the snow-covered ground. "The spirits heat these waters from below," Running Bear explained. "They flow warm even in deepest winter, bringing plants that should not grow in snow months." Whitefeather led them to specific locations around the springs, guiding Sarah's hands to identify rare fungi and evergreen plants with medicinal properties. As they worked, the old woman shared knowledge through Running Bear's translation, which combinations relieved which ailments, how preparation methods changed the medicine's strength, which plants spoke to which parts of the body. They were so engrossed in this work that all 3 failed to notice approaching riders until the horses were less than 100 yards away. Running Bear's sudden tension alerted Sarah first. "What is it?" she whispered. "Soldiers," he replied tersely. 4 riders approach from the northwest. They must not see you." Before Sarah could protest, Whitefeather took charge, speaking rapidly in Lakota. Running Bear translated in urgent whispers as he guided Sarah toward a dense thicket of evergreens. "Hide here! Do not move or speak, no matter what you hear. If things go badly, follow the spring sound downstream when all is quiet. It leads eventually to the village." "I won't leave you," Sarah began, but Running Bear cut her off. "This is not time for Wazichu stubbornness. Soldiers finding Lakota warrior with white woman would mean death, perhaps for all 3 of us. Trust me one more time." The raw plea in his voice silenced her objections. Sarah crouched in the concealing thicket, heart pounding as Running Bear moved away to join White Feather. Moments later, she heard the distinctive sound of horses approaching, followed by men's voices speaking English. "You there? What business have you at these springs?" Running Bear answered in deliberately broken English. "Gather medicine plants for village. Old grandmother needs help." A different voice spoke, edged with suspicion. "You speak English pretty well for a savage. Where'd you learn?" "Trade with Fort. Learn words, trade better." White Feather said, something in Lakota that Running Bear didn't translate. One of the soldiers laughed. "What did the old squaw say?" "Grandmother asks if soldiers lost. Whispering Creek village, not on soldier path." A third voice joined the conversation, carrying the unmistakable authority of command. "We're tracking settlers missing after the big storm 3 weeks back. Wagon train reported a woman unaccounted for. Any strangers come your way? White woman, blind." Sarah held her breath, blood roaring in her ears. How could they possibly be looking for her? The Hawthornes had left her for dead, made no attempt to search when the storm abated. Why would soldiers be asking now? Running Bear's response came after a calculated pause. "No white woman here. Storm spirits take many souls to the other side. Perhaps she walks Star Path now. This village been harboring any whites?" The officer pressed. "We've got reports from a Mr. Blackstone that the missing woman might have valuable information about certain business matters. Says she might seek shelter with Indians out of confusion or fear." Harold Blackstone. The name struck Sarah like a physical blow. Her father's banker, the man who had advised the Hawthornes about selling her family property, who had handled the transactions with suspicious speed. If he was searching for her, it couldn't possibly be from concern. White Feather spoke again in Lakota, this time at length. Running Bear translated with careful neutrality. "Grandmother says Lakota honor storm spirits' decisions. If spirits wanted white woman dead, she walked Star Path. If spirits saved her, they had purpose. Soldiers should ask storm spirits, not Lakota people." The officer made an exasperated sound. "We don't have time for Indian superstitions, but these springs aren't on the reservation boundary, so you've got no cause keeping us from looking around." Panic flared in Sarah's chest. If they searched the area, they would find her. Running Bear would be accused of kidnapping, or worse. White Feather might be harmed for interfering with official business. The fragile acceptance she'd begun building in the village would shatter. Just as she heard the sounds of men dismounting, White Feather began to sing. The melody rose haunting and strange over the steaming springs, creating an eerie effect that caused an immediate reaction from the soldiers. "What's she doing?" One demanded nervously. Running Bear's voice took on a mysterious quality. "Grandmother sings to spring spirits, warns them strangers come. Spirits become angry when disturbed by those who do not honor them. Last soldiers who angered spring spirits found snakes in bedrolls, fell sick with spotted fever." May a long silence followed, broken only by White Feather's continuous singing. Finally, the officer spoke, his previous authority notably diminished. "We've got ground to cover before nightfall. You see any sign of white settlers, you report to Tume. Fort Laramie immediately. Understood?" "Hear soldier words," Running Bear agreed solemnly. "We'll tell Chief." The sound of horses moving away, gradually fading into distance, released the breath Sarah hadn't realized she was holding. Still, she remained frozen in her hiding place until Running Bear's hand gently touched her shoulder. "They have gone. You are safe." She grasped his arm, pulling herself up on shaking legs. It was Blackstone, Harold Blackstone, my father's banker. He's looking for me, but not out of concern. "What would this man want with blind woman?" White Feather asked through Running Bear's translation. "I don't know exactly," Sarah admitted, But the timing is suspicious. He arranged the sale of my family land just before the Hawthorns joined the wagon train. He was very insistent the sale happen quickly, offered less than the property was worth. Running Bear was silent for a long moment. Land holds many secrets. Perhaps yours contained something valuable this money man discovered only after you had gone. This changes matters, Whitefeather said decisively. Council must hear that soldiers search specifically for you. Decision can no longer wait 7 days. They returned to the village with their gathered medicines, an undercurrent of tension running beneath the otherwise successful expedition. Word of the soldiers' presence spread quickly, and by nightfall, drums called the council to gather. Sarah was summoned to appear, an unprecedented honor for an outsider, and a woman at that. Whitefeather escorted her to the council lodge, a larger structure where multiple fires created a warmth that couldn't quite dispel Sarah's anxiety. She was seated in what Running Bear later explained was the position of both honor and scrutiny, visible to all members, but vulnerable to their collective judgment. The meeting began with lengthy rituals, prayers in Lakota, the ceremonial lighting of a sacred pipe, formal statements from Chief Standing Elk. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the gravity of the proceedings was unmistakable. Finally, the discussion turned to her specifically, with Running Bear positioned nearby to translate. Chief Standing Elk asks why soldiers search for you, he relayed. Why this man Blackstone seeks blind woman with such determination. Sarah rose to her feet, facing the direction of the chief's voice. I believe Harold Blackstone may have discovered something valuable on my family's land after arranging its sale. My presence threatens him because I might question the transaction or make claims against him. Swift Arrow spoke then, his words sharp even without translation. Running Bear provided the essence. He says, this proves you bring danger. Your problems should not become Lakota problems. Several voices added similar sentiments, creating a current of agreement that Sarah could feel building against her. When Whitefeather spoke, her authority temporarily silenced the debate, but the tension remained palpable. She says the spirit sent you for purpose, Running Bear translated. That purpose now becomes clear. You bring warning of danger that would come regardless of your presence. Soldiers use you as excuse, but their eyes examine Lakota lands with hunger. Chief Standing Elk addressed Sarah directly, his words measured and deliberate, as Running Bear translated, the council faces difficult decision. To shelter you risks bringing soldiers who always find reasons to violate our boundaries. To send you away dishonors the spirits who guided Running Bear to save you, disrespects Whitefeather's vision. Before we decide, you must speak your truth. What do you seek among Lakota people? If granted place here, what would you offer in return? The question struck Sarah with its profound implication. Not just sanctuary for the moment, but potentially a permanent place in this community. She had not allowed herself to consider such a possibility, assuming her presence would be temporary until some nebulous other arrangement could be made. I seek to learn ways of living that honor all forms of strength, she said, after careful consideration. In my world, blindness made me useless. Here, I've begun to discover gifts within what others saw as weakness. In return, I offer those gifts. My hands that work despite blindness, my ears that hear what others might miss, my willingness to learn and share knowledge across worlds. She hesitated, then added, I cannot promise that my presence won't bring complications, but I can promise to face those challenges with courage and respect for the people who sheltered me when my own kind abandoned me to die. Her words were translated, followed by extensive discussion that occasionally grew heated. Sarah stood patiently, understanding that her future hung in the balance of this debate. Finally, Chief Standing Elk spoke again, his tone suggesting A decision had been reached. The council has determined that the spirit's will must be honored. Running Bear translated, "You may remain among us until the moon of awakening plants, what you call spring. During this time, you will learn our ways under White Feather's guidance. When warm seasons return, council will reconsider based on what you have become among us." Relief flooded through Sarah, though it was tempered by the conditional nature of the acceptance. 4 months of winter stretched before her, time to prove her worth or confirm their suspicions. "Thank you," she said simply, adding the Lakota expression of gratitude White Feather had taught her. "Filamayaye, I will honor your wisdom and work to justify your trust." The days that followed established new patterns of life. White Feather's lodge became Sarah's home, the old woman an exacting but patient teacher of language, culture, and medicine. Each morning began with listening meditation, sitting in silence before dawn, absorbing the village's awakening through sound alone. "Every day has its own voice," White Feather explained. "Village speaks its health to those who truly listen. Happy children, busy women, men whose voices carry strength. These tell of good balance, silence where should be sound, harsh words where should be laughter. These warn of sickness coming." Sarah discovered a natural aptitude for this practice, her years of blindness having already developed extraordinary auditory perception. She learned to distinguish individual families by their morning rhythms, to recognize specific children by their footsteps, to identify which dogs belonged to which households by their distinctive barks. During daylight hours, she worked with the Women's Circle, initially performing basic tasks like sorting dried foods and preparing hides. As her skills and language improved, she graduated to more complex responsibilities, grinding herbs for medicine, crafting storage containers, helping prepare the daily meals that sustained the village through harsh winter days. Running Bear visited regularly, though always with propriety that Sarah found both frustrating and endearing. His role had shifted from rescuer and teacher to something more complex: cultural interpreter, advocate before the council, and increasingly, friend, whose presence she anticipated with quickening pulse and heightened awareness. "You learn quickly," he observed one evening as they walked through the village, Sarah navigating confidently with her walking stick. "Already, children call you by Lakota name rather than blind white woman. They've given me a name," Sarah asked, surprised. "Ingyang Owichakyaka Wingyang," Running Bear replied. "Stone that speaks woman. They say you listen to stones and plants as if hearing voices others miss." The name touched Sarah deeply, not just acceptance, but recognition of the very quality she'd begun to value in herself. The ability to perceive beyond sight, to find messages in what others overlooked, had transformed from compensatory skill to genuine gift. Her growing integration faced its first serious challenge in early December. A hunting party returned with alarming news. Soldiers had established a temporary camp just 2 days' ride from Whispering Creek. The warriors reported seeing Harold Blackstone among them, apparently still pursuing his search despite the onset of winter. The council convened immediately, debates raging about appropriate responses. Some advocated temporarily relocating the village deeper into the sheltered valleys. Others argued for maintaining position, but establishing continuous scout patrols. A few, Swift Arrow most vocal among them, suggested resolving the problem by delivering Sarah to the soldiers. "My presence endangers everyone," Sarah acknowledged, when Running Bear reported the council's division. "Perhaps I should go to Fort Laramie myself, confront Blackstone directly about his interest in my family's land." "And say what?" Running Bear challenged. "That you suspect dishonesty but have no proof? That you abandoned settler life to live among Lakota? Such accusations from woman alone would find no justice in white man's world. Then what solution remains? I won't bring destruction to people who saved me." Chief Standing Elk has decided, Running Bear informed her. Scouts will watch soldier camp but not engage. Village preparations continue as normal, and, he hesitated, I am to journey to your family's land in Virginia. The announcement stunned Sarah. Virginia? That's hundreds of miles through winter conditions. Why would Standing Elk order such a dangerous mission? To discover what Blackstone hides, Running Bear explained. If your land holds valuable secret, proof might be found. Such evidence could protect both you and village, give soldiers reason to pursue Blackstone instead of Lakota people. But the journey, I have traveled such distances before. 2 warriors will accompany me part way. We leave at tomorrow's dawn. Sarah felt as though the ground had suddenly vanished beneath her feet. In the weeks since arriving at Whispering Creek, Running Bear had remained her constant connection to the familiar, her advocate in unfamiliar territory. The prospect of his absence created a hollow sensation she wasn't prepared to examine closely. When would you return? If weather favors journey, perhaps 6 weeks. If winter grows harsh, he left the alternative unspoken. That evening, Whitefeather organized a ceremony, blessing Running Bear's dangerous mission. The village gathered around the central fire, prayers and songs rising into the star-filled night. Sarah sat among the women, absorbing the rhythms of unfamiliar words, the smoky sweetness of ceremonial herbs, the palpable concern and hope that transcended language barriers. Afterward, Running Bear sought her out, leading her to a quiet spot at the village edge where their words wouldn't be overheard. The December night carried bone-deep cold, but neither suggested returning to warmer surroundings. I have something for you, Sarah said, removing a small object from her pocket, her father's compass, the brass worn smooth from years of handling. This guided my father through unknown territories. Perhaps it will help bring you safely back. Running Bear took the offering, his fingers briefly touching hers in a contact that sent warmth cascading through her, despite the winter chill. This was your father's, your most valued possession, which is why I trust you to return it, she replied simply. She felt him move, heard the soft sound of leather against leather as he removed something from his own clothing. And I have. This for you, he said, pressing a small object into her palm. Carved from stone from Beartooth Cave, where our paths first joined. Sarah's fingers explored the gift, a small fox figurine, perfectly smooth, each detail precisely rendered for discovery by touch rather than sight. It's beautiful, she whispered, somehow knowing this with certainty despite never having seen. It Fox walks between worlds, Running Bear explained, neither largest nor strongest, yet survives through cleverness and adaptability. When others see only weakness, Fox finds different paths to strength. The metaphor wasn't lost on Sarah. She closed her fingers around the stone carving, its solid presence somehow both comforting and bittersweet. Return safely, she said, her voice threatening to break. I've only just found this new path. I'm not ready to walk it without your guidance. You have Whitefeather now, and others who begin to see your spirit's strength, Running Bear replied, but I will return if the great mystery allows it. He departed at first light, Sarah standing with Whitefeather and the other women as the small expedition moved out. She remained until even the sounds of their departure had faded completely, her hand clutching the stone fox as if it might somehow maintain connection across the growing distance. Now your true learning begins, Whitefeather announced as they returned to her lodge. Until now you stood in Running Bear's shadow. Without him, you must cast your own. The following weeks proved the old woman's words prophetic. Without Running Bear as intermediary, Sarah found herself forced to communicate more directly with the village community. her halting Lakota improving rapidly from necessity. Whitefeather intensified her training in medicinal practices, teaching Sarah to identify dozens of plants by scent and texture, to prepare treatments for winter ailments, to feel the subtle differences in body temperature that indicated various imbalances. An outbreak of winter cough created unexpected opportunity. Several children developed the harsh, barking respiratory distress that often led to more serious illness. Whitefeather's traditional remedies helped, but didn't fully resolve the symptoms. Sarah remembered her mother's trusted treatment for such cases, a steam tent with specific herbs that soothed inflamed breathing passages. With Whitefeather's permission, she demonstrated the technique, showing how to create a small enclosed space where the afflicted child could breathe medicated steam. The treatment proved remarkably effective, reducing recovery time significantly. Mothers who had previously kept distance from the blind outsider now sought her advice, bringing their children for the combined treatments that married Lakota plant knowledge with settler techniques. "You build bridge between healing ways," Whitefeather observed with approval. "This strengthens both sides." By the winter solstice, Sarah had established a tentative place within the community. Children no longer fell silent when she approached, instead, often seeking her out to request stories from the other world or to guide her hands in their games. Several women regularly included her in work circles, particularly for tasks where her sensitive fingers proved advantageous, like detecting flaws in stitching or identifying the readiness of leather in the tanning process. Even Swift Arrow's open hostility had moderated to wary tolerance, especially after Sarah correctly identified his youngest daughter's ear infection through careful touch and listening to the child's responses to specific head movements. The warrior would never become an ally, but his opposition had lost its sharper edges. Throughout these developments, Sarah remained acutely aware of Running Bear's absence. Each day, she joined Whitefeather in morning meditation, not only listening to the village's awakening, but stretching her awareness outward, as if she might somehow detect his return across vast distances. Though she never spoke of this practice, Whitefeather seemed to understand. "Heart reaches where ears cannot," the old woman commented one particularly bitter morning. "Sometimes spirits carry messages between those connected by something stronger than sight." A January brought the harshest weather in living memory, according to the elders. Blizzards raged for days at a time. Temperatures plummeted to levels that froze breath instantly, and game became increasingly scarce. The village turned to stored provisions, carefully rationed to stretch through what promised to be an extended winter. Everyone tightened belts, shared resources, and maintained ceremonies believed to encourage the eventual return of warmer seasons. During this difficult period, Sarah found unexpected purpose. Her reduced food requirements compared to the active hunters became an asset rather than burden. Her ability to function effectively in darkness proved valuable during the shortened daylight hours. Most significantly, the calendar in her head, a lifetime habit of tracking days, despite blindness, helped the village maintain its ceremonial schedule when blurred days of identical whiteness confused even experienced timekeepers. "How many days until Bear comes out moon?" Whitefeather asked one morning, referring to what settlers called February. 12, Sarah answered without hesitation. "Today is the 19th of January by my counting." Such precision impressed the elders, reinforcing their growing belief that her blindness connected to special gifts. Sarah neither encouraged nor discouraged this interpretation, understanding that each culture constructed its own meanings around difference. What mattered was that her contributions were valued, her presence increasingly seen as beneficial rather than burdensome. 6 weeks after Running Bear's departure came and went with no sign of his return. Though Sarah maintained outward calm, inwardly she battled growing anxiety. Had something happened on the journey? Was he injured, captured, or worse? The possibility that she might never learn his fate haunted her sleepless nights. When scouts reported increased military activity near Fort Laramie, tension escalated throughout the village. Rumors circulated that soldiers planned spring campaigns against non-compliant Lakota bands. Whether Whispering Creek might be targeted remained unclear, but preparations for potential conflict began nonetheless. Some believe your presence draws this danger. Singing Crow, a young woman who had become Sarah's closest friend among the villagers, confided. Others say you were sent as warning, allowing us to prepare before the storm breaks. What do you believe? Sarah asked. Singing Crow considered the question seriously, but I believe paths cross for reasons beyond our understanding. Running Bear found you because he was meant to. What comes from that meeting is still unfolding, like a story. We hear only one word at a time. On a frigid February morning, as Sarah sat with Whitefeather in their customary dawn meditation, she detected an unusual pattern in the ambient sounds. Something approached the village, not with the furtive movement of predators or the cautious advance of potential enemies, but the deliberate pace of someone familiar with the territory. Someone comes, she whispered to Whitefeather, from the northeast path. Whitefeather cocked her head, her own finely tuned senses confirming Sarah's detection. The old woman rose silently, moving with unexpected agility toward the lodge entrance. She spoke a few rapid words to someone outside, then returned to Sarah's side. "Scouts confirm," she said in her accented English. "3 figures approach. From Northeast Trail, one walks like Running Bear." The words sent Sarah's heart racing. She fought to maintain composure, her fingers instinctively finding the stone fox she now wore on a leather cord around her neck. "How far?" "They reach village before sun stands tall," Whitefeather replied. "If spirits favor journey's end." The waiting proved almost unbearable. Sarah attempted to continue her normal morning routines, helping prepare breakfast, sorting dried herbs for the day's medicinal preparations, practicing her steadily improving Lakota with the children, who typically gathered at Whitefeather's lodge. But her attention repeatedly strayed toward the village perimeter, her ears straining for any sound that might confirm the returning party's identity. Shortly before midday, a commotion at the village edge announced their arrival. Children's excited voices carried clearly through the winter air, followed by the deeper tones of men calling greetings. Sarah stood outside Whitefeather's lodge, her body tense with anticipation, fear and hope intertwined. Footsteps approached, familiar footsteps whose rhythm she had memorized months before, though now they carried a slight unevenness, suggesting injury or exhaustion. Then his voice, roughened by travel but unmistakably Running Bear's, spoke her name. Sarah. She took a half-step forward, then stopped, suddenly uncertain of proper protocol. In Lakota society, public displays of emotion were governed by complex rules she was still learning. "You've returned safely," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The journey was difficult," he replied, fatigue evident in each word, but not without success. Only then did Sarah register the presence of others, at least one unfamiliar tread approaching behind Running Bear. Before she could question this, Whitefeather joined them, speaking rapid Lakota that included formal welcomes and what sounded like instructions. "The council gathers immediately," Running Bear translated. "What we have discovered cannot wait." Sarah found herself escorted to the council lodge, placed again in the position of both honor and scrutiny as village leaders assembled with unusual haste. The space filled quickly, voices murmuring in speculation and concern. Chief Standing Elk called for silence with a single word, then invited Running Bear to speak. What followed was a lengthy account delivered in Lakota, occasionally interrupted by questions or expressions of disbelief. Sarah understood fragments, enough to recognize mentions of Virginia, her family's land, and Harold Blackstone, but awaited translation for the complete picture. When Running Bear finished his formal report, he moved to Sarah's side, speaking in English for her benefit, while White Feather provided periodic Lakota translation for the council. "We reached your family's land after 6 weeks of difficult travel," he began. "What we found confirms your suspicions. Blackstone has men working your property, not as settlers, but as miners." "Miners?" Sarah repeated, confusion evident in her voice. What could they be mining? That land was primarily agricultural, with some forest. "Silver," Running Bear replied simply. "A significant deposit lies beneath the eastern portion of your family's property, beneath the forest. Your father refused to clear for farming." The revelation struck Sarah with stunning clarity. Her father had indeed protected that woodland, rejecting multiple offers to purchase it separately from the main farm. "My father loved those trees," she murmured, "said they were ancient friends who deserved respect." "He may have known more than he revealed," Running Bear suggested. "We found old survey markers on trees, documentation in what appeared to be an abandoned surveyor's cabin nearby, papers suggesting your father discovered the silver years ago but chose not to exploit it." "That would be like him," Sarah acknowledged. "He valued balance in all things, said wealth that destroyed beauty held no true value." Running Bear continued, explaining how they had observed the mining operation for several days, gathering evidence of Blackstone's deception. The banker had clearly arranged the property's sale under false pretenses, then immediately begun extracting silver without proper claims or taxation. "But most significant," Running Bear added, "we found your father's journal." Sarah's breath caught. "His mapping journal, the leather-bound book with raised notations?" "Yes, hidden beneath floorboards in the surveyor's cabin, and we brought someone who can verify its contents legally." Only then did Sarah fully register the stranger who had accompanied Running Bear's return, the unfamiliar footsteps she'd noted earlier. Running Bear made a formal introduction. "This is Thomas Mackenzie, former clerk to your father's solicitor. In Richmond, he recognized your family's situation from my inquiries and chose to accompany our return journey." A cultured Virginia accent addressed her directly. "Miss Walsh, I worked with your father for many years. When this Lakota gentleman began asking questions about the Walsh property and described the circumstances of your situation, I recognized Mr. Blackstone's handiwork immediately." "Mr. Mackenzie risks much by coming here," Running Bear explained, "but he brings knowledge that can protect both you and Whispering Creek." The council listened intently as Thomas Mackenzie outlined the legal implications of their discoveries. Through Running Bear's translation, he explained how Blackstone had almost certainly committed fraud, both against Sarah and against territorial authorities, by mining without proper claims or tax payments. "Most importantly," Mackenzie concluded, "the journal contains your father's explicit instruction that the mineral rights remain with his daughter regardless of property sale. He suspected the silver's existence, but chose conservation over exploitation. However, he legally protected your interests should the situation change." Chief Standing Elk spoke at length when the presentation concluded. Running Bear provided translation for Sarah. "The chief says this changes our understanding completely. What appeared to be white woman's problem threatening Lakota safety now reveals itself as powerful protection. Soldiers pursuing illegal mining operation will look away from Whispering Creek toward Blackstone instead." The council erupted in discussion, most voices now supporting a strategy that would use these revelations to divert military attention from their village. Sarah sat quietly, absorbing the implications not just for her current situation, but for Her future. If Mackenzie's legal assessment proved correct, she potentially had claim to significant wealth, wealth that could provide options previously unimaginable. When the council reached its decision, Chief Standing Elk addressed Sarah directly. "The people of Whispering Creek offer you choice," Running Bear translated. "When snow melts, we will help you reach Fort Laramie with evidence against this Blackstone. You may reclaim your white world position, perhaps with new strength silver brings. Or," he paused, "you may return to us afterward, no longer as outsider, seeking shelter, but as Stone That Speaks woman, recognized member of our band." The magnitude of the choice rendered Sarah momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, the chief added a significant detail. "Running Bear would accompany you to Fort Laramie regardless of your choice. As witness, as protector, as one who now walks between worlds by his own decision." That evening, as the village celebrated the expedition's safe return with feasting and ceremonial dancing, Sarah sat beside Whitefeather's fire, turning possibilities over in her mind. Thomas Mackenzie had provided further details about her potential claim, explaining how the evidence they'd gathered could not only secure her inheritance, but potentially bring charges against Blackstone for fraud and illegal mining. "With your father's journal and my testimony," Mackenzie explained, "you could reclaim not just financial compensation, but your rightful place in Virginia society. Blindness need not relegate you to dependency, especially with the resources this claim would provide." "And if I chose to remain with the Lakota afterward?" Sarah asked. Mackenzie hesitated. "Legally, as an adult woman of sound mind, you could certainly choose your residence once your affairs were settled. Socially, such a choice would raise eyebrows, to put it mildly. But with financial independence, others' opinions might matter less." After Mackenzie retired to the guest lodge prepared for him, Running Bear joined Sarah by the fire. For several minutes, they sat in comfortable silence, the familiar presence of each other more eloquent than words after their long separation. "You are different," Running Bear observed finally. "Stronger, more certain in your movements. Whitefeather proved a demanding teacher," Sarah replied with a smile. "And necessity teaches quickly when winter threatens and one must contribute or freeze. The village speaks of you differently now. Even Swift Arrow acknowledges your medicine knowledge, though he would sooner bite his tongue than admit it directly." Another silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions about what would come next. Sarah's fingers found the stone fox at her throat, drawing comfort from its solid presence. "Your father's journal revealed a man of unusual vision," Running Bear said eventually. "He mapped not just land features, but relationships, how water flows connect distant places, how animal migrations follow ancient patterns, how human settlements alter these relationships for good or ill." "That sounds like him," Sarah agreed. "He always said a true map showed connections, not just boundaries." "He would be proud of how you've mapped new territory, not with eyes, but with spirit." The simple observation touched Sarah deeply. She had indeed created new kinds of maps these past months, mental landscapes of sound and texture, relationship webs within the village, pathways of knowledge between settler and Lakota medicine traditions. "I face an impossible choice," she admitted, "return to a world that never truly saw me, even when I could see it, or remain in a world where I've found unexpected vision, but may never fully belong." Running Bear shifted slightly, his voice lowering. "Perhaps the choice is not between two separate worlds, but how to stand at their intersection. The silver. Wealth offers freedom to create new path, one neither purely Lakota nor purely settler." "And what of you?" Sarah asked, finally voicing the question that underlay all others. "Where does your path lead after Fort Laramie?" His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining with quiet certainty. My path joined with yours in blizzard months ago. Whether it leads to settler towns or Lakota villages matters less than that we walk it together, if that is your wish. The simple declaration, offered without grand promises or florid declarations, embodied everything Sarah had come to value about this man and the culture he represented. Direct truth, respect for her agency, and courage to face whatever consequences their choice might bring. I need to face Blackstone, she said after a moment's reflection, not just for justice or compensation, but to close that chapter properly. To stand before him not as the helpless blind woman he thought he could eliminate from his calculations, but as someone who found strength in what he perceived as weakness. And after? Running Bear asked. Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand gently. After we create a new map together. Spring's arrival brought dramatic changes to Whispering Creek. As snow receded and the first green shoots emerged from winter-hardened earth, preparations began for the journey to Fort Laramie. Chief Standing Elk assigned 4 warriors to accompany Sarah, Running Bear, and Thomas Mackenzie, ostensibly as guides, but equally as statement of tribal support. Whitefeather conducted a ceremony the night before their departure, her ancient hands painting symbolic designs on Sarah's face that she described as marks of one who sees beyond seeing. The entire village participated, offering prayers and gifts for a successful journey. You return different than you arrived, Whitefeather observed as she worked. Shadow of death no longer walks beside you. Instead, you carry vision path for yourself, for others. The journey to Fort Laramie took 6 days, following ancient trails that Running Bear described in meticulous detail, helping Sarah create a mental map of their progress. Each evening, she practiced what she would say when confronting Blackstone, rehearsing the evidence with Mackenzie until her case became unassailable. They arrived at the fort on a bright April morning, their unusual party causing immediate sensation. Lakota warriors accompanying a blind white woman and a Richmond solicitor's clerk. The fort commander, initially suspicious, became keenly interested when Mackenzie presented letters of introduction and outlined the nature of their complaint against Harold Blackstone. Blackstone's been causing problems throughout the territory, the commander admitted. Claims authority beyond his station, makes demands of military resources for what he calls official business. If you have evidence of unlawful activity, I'm all too happy to hear it. A formal hearing was arranged for the following day. Word spread quickly, and by morning, Blackstone himself had arrived at the fort, blustering about ridiculous accusations and Indian deception. His confidence visibly faltered when he entered the commander's office and found Sarah waiting, composed and upright, with Running Bear beside her and Mackenzie arranging documented evidence on the commander's desk. "Miss Walsh," Blackstone managed, his voice betraying shock despite attempted cordiality. "We've been searching for you for months. The Hawthornes were devastated by your loss during the blizzard." "How fascinating," Sarah replied evenly, "considering they made no attempt to find me after deliberately abandoning me during the storm. One might almost suspect they believed their actions had successfully eliminated an inconvenient burden, perhaps on your instruction." The commander guided the proceeding with military efficiency, allowing Mackenzie to present their case methodically. The evidence proved damning. Sarah's father's journal, with its explicit reservation of mineral rights, documentation of illegal mining operations on Walsh property, testimonials from Mackenzie about suspected fraud in the property transfer, and most devastatingly, territorial records showing Blackstone had filed no mining claims nor paid appropriate taxes. As Blackstone's denials grew increasingly desperate, Sarah addressed him directly. "You miscalculated twice, Mr. Blackstone. First, in believing my blindness made me incapable of defending my interests. Second, in assuming that because I couldn't see your actions, no one else would either. The commander's judgment came swiftly. Blackstone would be detained pending formal charges of fraud, illegal mining and tax evasion. The Walsh property would be placed under territorial protection until legal ownership could be properly established, and most immediately relevant. To Sarah, her claim to the mineral rights would be formally recorded, with appropriate compensation to be determined for resources already extracted. As Blackstone was escorted from the office in stunned disbelief, the commander turned to the Lakota contingent with uncommon respect. "Your people's assistance in this matter has been noted. The territory owes you gratitude for bringing this corruption to light." Chief Standing Elk's warriors accepted this acknowledgement with dignified restraint, though Running Bear later translated their private assessment. Words of thanks mean little without actions to match. But perhaps this small victory creates space for larger understanding. In the days that followed, Sarah worked with Mackenzie to formalize her legal position. The revelation of her father's foresight in protecting the mineral rights, combined with evidence of Blackstone's fraud, positioned her to claim significant compensation. More importantly, it established her legal standing as a competent adult, managing her own affairs despite her blindness, a revolutionary concept in 1850s America. When the essential legal matters had been settled, Sarah faced her final decision. Mackenzie had offered to accompany her back to Richmond, where she could establish herself with newfound financial independence. Several Fort families, impressed by her story, extended invitations to stay while she considered her options. The path back to civilization lay open before her, potentially easier than it had ever been. Instead, Sarah asked Mackenzie to establish a trust for her affairs, with provisions for periodic reports to be sent to Fort Laramie for collection. She arranged for a portion of the silver proceeds to fund a small school for children with disabilities, remembering how differently her own blindness might have been addressed with proper education rather than pity. "You're certain about this?" Mackenzie asked as they finalized the arrangements. "You'd be welcome in Richmond society now, especially with financial independence. Your story would open doors previously closed." "I'm certain," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I've learned to see the world differently these past months. I won't return to blindness of a different sort." On the morning of their departure from Fort Laramie, Sarah stood with Running Bear at the fort gates, dressed in a unique blend of settler and Lakota clothing that symbolized her chosen path. The commander had arranged for a document officially, recognizing her legal right to reside with the Lakota if she chose, an unprecedented acknowledgement that offered some small protection in increasingly complicated times. "You understand this decision will not be easy," Running Bear said quietly as their party prepared to leave. "You will always stand between worlds, never fully belonging to either." Sarah took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his in the gesture that had come to represent their unique partnership. "Perhaps that's precisely where I'm meant to stand, where different kinds of vision meet, where new understanding might grow." They returned to Whispering Creek as spring blossomed, fully across the plains. The village welcomed them with celebration, Whitefeather conducting a ceremony that formally acknowledged Sarah's place among them, not as outsider or guest, but as chosen family. Even Swift Arrow participated, grudgingly admitting that her actions at Fort Laramie had potentially protected Lakota interests as well as her own. In the years that followed, Sarah became known throughout the territory as Stone That Speaks Woman, a blind healer whose unique combination of settler and Lakota medicine drew people from both worlds seeking treatment. The trust established with her silver wealth provided resources that helped the village weather increasingly difficult times as white encroachment intensified. Though she could not prevent the larger forces reshaping the plains, her position at the intersection of worlds sometimes allowed her to moderate their worst impacts. She and Running Bear created a life that honored both their heritages while forging something new. Their children grew up speaking both languages, learning both cultures' stories, and developing unique perspectives as bridge builders during decades of profound change. Through it all, Sarah maintained her practice of dawn listening. Each day, beginning with the simple act of perceiving the world through senses beyond sight. On her 50th birthday, as she sat outside their lodge in pre-dawn darkness, with the stone fox pendant warm against her palm, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from abandoned victim to respected healer. The blizzard that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to an entirely different existence than the one she'd been raised to expect. In losing her predetermined path, she had found one truer to her essential nature. Running Bear joined her as the first birds began their morning songs, his familiar presence settling beside her with the comfort of decades shared. "What do you hear this morning?" he asked, the question part of their daily ritual. Sarah smiled, turning her face toward the lightening eastern sky she couldn't see but always felt. "I hear possibility," she answered, "the sound of worlds connecting rather than colliding, and beneath it all, the steady drumbeat of a path still unfolding before us." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out!